How many alcoholics does it take to screw in a light bulb? Just one. They hold up the bulb, and the world revolves around them. Brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bad Country. I was having a conversation with somebody behind the scenes of Bad Country. Somebody younger than me. I'm allowed to do that. Someone in early sobriety. And they asked me a really revealing question. This person was 22, and I, of course, am 29. And the question that they asked was this. Looking back on my long career as an alcoholic, was there any point in my early drinking that should have been a warning to stop then? With everything that I know now, can I see in my own history a moment where I was like, that was it. That's when I should have quit. And it's such a good question that I asked permission to turn it into a full video to address it. And that's what this is. So here it is. I'm going to tell you the experience that should have stopped me drinking when I was young, but didn't. And I should say, since I'm fiddling with this so much, I've had a couple of people ask about my jewellery and stuff and about whether any of it is specifically related to sobriety. And it is. All of it is in one way or another. And this particular necklace is like my sobriety talisman, I suppose. It's my Bad Country one day at a time pendant. And if you think it might help keep you sober as it does me, then there is a link in the description. I have a very, very limited number available, should you want one. Alright, let's get back to it. There are a few experiences from my 20s which kind of marked me out as a candidate for problematic drinking in my 30s. Occasionally they kind of are surfaced up by Facebook as Facebook memories. Occasionally Facebook will send a message to the home screen of my smartphone and it'll say, relive this cherished memory, and I click it and it's a selfie that I took in a jail cell in Hungary or something. Like, yeah, thanks for that, Facebook. I could have lived without reliving that particular cherished memory. But there is one experience which really stands out. It's from long before I recognized or had a desire for sobriety. It's before I really ever had any conversations about alcoholism. In fact, it was before my metabolism changed with age, from a time when my body was still able to operate on a hangover. So, let's warm up. I never took a break from education. Between the ages of 4 and until I graduated at 21, I had never been out of education. In fact, one year, my attendance at school was so good that they gave me a dictionary as a reward. They gave me a prize for being a nerd. And the prize was a dictionary, the nerdiest possible book. And I never really realised how funny that was until today. Instead of a dictionary, maybe they should have just skipped to the end and handed me a copy of the big book. Might have saved some trouble in the long run. So when I turned 21, I decided to take a break before I began my career. And what I settled on was a kind of working holiday. And for nearly 6 months, I worked as a chef in a hotel in the ski resort of Méribel in the French Alps. That was my job. It was an incredible time. Every morning, I woke up with a view of Mont Blanc at the end of the valley. And it was so bitterly cold some nights that my chef whites would freeze to my body when I was taking the bins out after the evening shift. And it was a very formative part of my life. It was 6 months of food and music and incredible landscapes and snowboarding and sex and, of course, alcohol. All the alcohol. It was obvious pretty quickly that my drinking was worse than everybody else's. In fact, a few weeks into the season, a friend of mine pulled me aside and he said, he was like, you know what everyone says about you? They say you're really funny and smart, when you're sober. And that's stuck with me now for nearly 20 years. Red flag. If you hear stuff like that, that is a red flag for you. It only gets worse from there. But I was 21. I was just out of university. Everybody was drinking like that. To a degree. It was a hard drinking culture. We were basically living on a holiday resort, right? And we were young and fit and horny and excited and all away from home, some of us for the first time. And the ski and snowboard culture, it's a little bit like the skateboarding culture. There's something kind of counterculture about it that encourages rebelliousness and self-expression. And alcohol is a major part of that, especially in your late teens and early 20s. And up there in Méribel, you either live there, so you're part of that culture, or you are there on holiday, looking to have the time of your life. All of us were there, looking to have the time of our life. So, an average day for me, I would get up at 5:30 a.m. to cover the breakfast shift. And my room was in an annex attached to the side of the hotel. Everybody else had hotel rooms, apart from the kitchen staff, me and a couple of others. And we had these kind of outhouses, again, like pressed against the wall of the hotel. And they were not fit for human occupation, I can assure you. It was disgusting. Every morning my toothpaste would be frozen, and I'd have to kind of melt it with a lighter. And one morning, I pulled on my jeans, and 2 stag beetles fell out of my trouser leg, fighting, locked in mortal combat, in my pants. That's a weird sentence. It was awful, and I loved it. I loved it. The hotel is still there, incidentally. It's called Le Verso in Brie-de-la-Bain, if you want to go. Don't mention my name. This story does not end well. I'd go to the kitchen at 6 a.m. to begin the preparation for the day. The head chef would already be there. He was a small, round Italian man called Edmund, a smiling face and broken blood vessels in his cheeks. He was an incredible skier, despite his 55 years or so, and a very heavy drinker. He was very generous with us kids. He wasn't stressful with us as you might expect a head chef to be. He knew that we were there for a holiday more than a career, and he tolerated that. And he was a big character. His family name was well known around the town, and he could make stuff happen. And he quickly developed a catchphrase. If anything went even slightly wrong in the kitchen, he would throw his hands to his head and say, "Catastrophe!" which immediately entered all of our vocabularies, and we used to shout it at each other as we were coming down the slopes. Catastrophe! It was funny every time. One morning at 6 a.m. I arrived to work, obviously hungover or still drunk from the previous evening's shenanigans. And instead of shouting at me and being angry, he put up a finger and then he reached into his bag and he produced this clear, unlabeled bottle, like an old wine bottle. And he just handed it to me. And I took it, and inside was a very clear, kind of thick and gloopy liquid, and a dead snake. And he said, "Drink a little." And I was like, "C'est quoi?" And he shrugged and went, "Vipre." He called it viper. And that's what we called it too afterwards. And I took a shot of it, and it was some incredibly powerful spirit, some liquor of some kind, with a snake that he had caught and drowned in the fluid. And that was my breakfast that day. Kitchens, man. I wonder how anybody survives the service industry. And that's the large part of my audience, chefs and musicians. So after breakfast, we would go out, after the breakfast service was finished, we would go out onto the mountain. We'd have 4 or 5 hours a day of skiing or snowboarding or wandering the mountains. And then we would all rush back down to the hotel for the evening shift. And then we would, in the kitchen at least, we would prepare meals for about 150 guests. And as soon as the last dessert had gone out and was on the table, we'd start drinking while we cleaned the kitchen down. Either someone would buy a round of drinks for all the staff. This was a very informal hotel. The guests were also friendly. And if we'd been treating them well, they would quite often buy the entire staff drinks for the evening. Happened a lot. So as soon as we were kind of winding down for the evening, we had free alcohol available to us. And then by the time we were completely finished, which was usually about 11 or midnight, we would either go into the hotel bar if it was a quiet night, or we would go out to one of the local French nightclubs and get laid or get in a fight or drink too much and fall over on the way home, that kind of thing. And in those cases, if we'd gone out to one of those terrible little mountain nightclubs, we would roll home at 3 a.m. and then be up again at 5:30 for as long as our bodies allowed that to happen. And at the start of the season, I think we'd arrived in November time. At the start, we were all relatively well behaved. We might have like a beer in the après-ski in some bar on the mountain before we returned to the hotel for the evening shift. And when we got to the bottom of the ski lifts, we might have a van show, like a mulled wine or something. But we usually at the start weren't drinking during work. It was after work, in the night, when we were drinking and partying really hard. But that began to change around Christmas. By Christmas, we had been there long enough to know our jobs very well, and we had relaxed into our roles, and we were friends with each other. The staff knew each other, we knew the other people on the mountain. And as a result, in the run-up to Christmas, all of the rules and regulations all relaxed. By then, the novelty had worn off, and we'd got over that kind of social nervousness that you have when you're 21 years old in a new place. That had gone. And we were all by then quite good skiers and snowboarders. We were not so nervous on the mountain. And then from Christmas Eve onwards, most of us were drinking every day. And from that point afterwards, at least I was drunk every day, almost without exception, except very briefly where I had an injury. Something changed around that Christmas, where we all acknowledged that we were there for ourselves. We weren't there to strengthen our CV, and we weren't there to learn the skills of hotel management or anything like that. I was certainly not pursuing a career as a chef. I'd already been accepting paid work in the adult industry at that time. I was there for the life experience. And when you're 21, life seems to be made a little easier by alcohol. And I was often drunk at work. And then in early January, I made the entire town sick. I didn't mean to do it up front, let me just be clear. It was not a deliberate attack on the town. What happened is this. On one night, a new family arrived into one of the rooms, and they had brought with them a sick child. One of their children had developed a sickness or picked up a bug. And I was hooking up with the cleaner of their room. So this family went in, the child was sick everywhere. They called for a cleaner. There was the girl that I was hooking up with. And then she stayed with me that night and gave it to me, whatever that bug was. And then I went down in the morning and put it in everybody's breakfast. And I was ill before that service ended. I was ill before the end of the shift. I knew that I was sick. I didn't know that I'd made everybody else sick, though. And it was a horrible sickness and vomiting and diarrhea bug. And it was extremely virulent. And because I was one of the first people to get sick, I was also one of the first people to recover. So the following day, once the bug had passed, I was up at 6 a.m. taking some bins outside the hotel. And I was stood in a car park and I looked up and a light would come on and I'd hear this and then another light and another like until the whole hotel was awake and vomiting all at the same time. And it got so bad, the delivery drivers were also getting sick from contact with us and then spreading it into the wider valley. And in the end, the village that I was in, called Brie-de-la-Bain, had to be closed for a week until the bug had passed. And it was partially my fault. I'm sorry, France. And then after that it's funny in hindsight, but it kind of affected everybody's morale, because we didn't get paid if we didn't work, and everybody had lost like 2 days of work and pay. And the hotel was in a bit of a state after that. And we'd had to get people in. It was just awkward and uncomfortable time. Everybody was recovering. And then I think that, compounded by the Christmas, just reinforced in us the idea that we were there to have fun rather than be conscientious employees, especially me. So we were drinking heavily. And then I suffered a very bizarre injury, which I won't tell you about. Actually, yeah, I will. So I was on the snowboard one day, and I came over a peak, and on the other side, it was still partially in shadow from the morning, which meant it was still icy. And I came herring down from the piste and hit the ice, and the snowboard flipped out immediately, lost traction, flipped out from underneath me. And I flew, I don't know, 20 feet down the piste, and I landed on my left butt cheek, which immediately froze to the ground, very slightly, momentarily, while my right butt cheek and the rest of my body kept going. I made it to the bottom of the piste, and I could feel there was some warmth in my salopettes, in my ski trousers, and I put my hand down and I pulled it out, and there was blood. And I went to the doctor, and this was really early as well. It was the first ski lift, so it must have been 6:30 or 7 or something on my day off. And I went to the Red Cross station, and in there, I can't believe I'm telling this story on the internet. In there, I had to take back down my trousers, put my knees behind my head, and have the doctor, who was an elderly doctor with shaky hands who smelled suspiciously like red wine himself, had to stitch up my butthole with my shriveled, cold little dick just hanging over my face like this. Why did I tell that? What was that? Oh yeah, so that meant I couldn't ski or snowboard for a while. And I used that time to pick up other shifts, to make a little bit of money, but mostly to drink. Okay, enough. Let's with that story in mind, that's enough. Let's get straight to the thing that actually happened. So, on the staff, we were all having sex with each other and stuff. Like, it was very incestuous. A small community away from home is just like that, especially when you're 20 and 21. And we were all hooking up with each other, all fighting each other. It was just stupid, kid stuff. And by then I was hooking up sporadically with the actual hotel manager. And I was drinking continuously by this point, always drunk. And I had begun drinking the cooking wine in the kitchen, which is the cheapest, nastiest wine there is, and it will give you a turbo hangover. And it meant that I was regularly too drunk to go up the mountain, which was what I was there for. And the drinking had already begun to get me in trouble. I had occasionally been late for shifts, and I'd been sloppy, and I didn't care about the job, but I did care about my colleagues and my friends. And when I was pulled aside and told that my absences were putting my colleagues under unnecessary pressure, like my lack of work was adding to their workload, I decided to make amends for it. And one night, I told them that I would man the bar, and that they could all go and party on the mountain, and I would look after the hotel in their absence. I gave everybody a night off, essentially. And that was towards the end of the season, and there wasn't too many people in the hotel. But there was a group of South Africans it was their last night in the hotel when I offered to run the bar. And they were determined to make it count. They had a strategy for their evening, and I was willing to be suckered in by it. So what they did was, once all of the rest of the staff had gone, after dinner, everybody else was out partying on the mountain. It was just really me in the hotel. and they started buying me drinks and getting me really drunk really fast. And at some point, with various bits of chicanery and manipulation on their part, I just kind of announced, all right, fuck it, free bar. I just opened up the bar. And that was the last I remember of that evening. But I remember the morning. I remember, for some reason, every moment of that morning. I woke up and my legs were numb. And I was in a sitting position. I was not in my bed. I was not in my room. And I remember staring. I was still wearing my chef whites from the evening before. And I remember staring down at them, staring down at my shoes, and being confused, and not knowing what was going on. And I looked around, and there was a shower to my left. And I looked down, and I was sitting on a toilet. And then I kind of realised that where I was in the kitchen. I was in the hotel kitchen, which had a shower room and a toilet to one side, specifically for the kitchen staff. That's where I was. And then panic set in, because I knew that I was supposed to be at work, and I could hear noise. And I opened the door of this kind of shower toilet room in the kitchen, and I looked out, and there was half of the staff in the kitchen, desperately putting croissants in ovens and stirring onion soup, all of the things that I was supposed to be doing. And all of them simultaneously turned and looked at me with surprise in their face, just like... And the head waiter, a big, tough northern woman, she kind of looked at me and just said, "Where the fuck have you been?" I remember that voice, like, drilled into my brain. And there was silence in the kitchen, and then a tiny little voice popped up from the back that I recognized as Edmund's. He simply said, "Catastrophe." And nobody thought it was funny this time. Turned out I'd got so drunk in the bar with the South Africans that I had decided that I would sleep in the kitchen, under the impression that if I was already there, then I couldn't possibly be late in the morning. But I had fallen asleep on the toilet, not woken up again. And by the time I did wake up, it was already 8 a.m, perhaps. I was already 2 hours late for the shift. I'd missed the breakfast service. All of the staff had been to look for me, couldn't find me in the room, couldn't find me in any of the rooms of the girls that I was hooking up with. No, I was already in the kitchen, and no one thought to check in the toilet. And everybody was angry at me. Nobody thought that was cute. Nobody thought that was funny. I had doubled the workload of everybody else. Everybody had to cover my responsibilities just because I got smashed. And it wasn't just that, I should add. So when the South Africans, it was their last night in the hotel, and they absolutely cleaned the bar out. Okay, when I said free bar, not only did they help themselves to what was in the bar, they also stole half of the stock and took it out with them, left with it in their suitcases. Thousands and thousands of euros worth of alcohol. Absolutely cleaned us out. And it was my fault. And that afternoon, after I'd caught a couple of hours of sleep, I wandered sheepishly into the hotel manager's office. A woman that I had been literally sleeping with only a day and a half before. And I asked, "Am I fired?" And she looked at me and nodded. So I got fired by someone I was having sex with. I used to look back on that time with only fondness. But now, with the kind of clarity and self-awareness that comes with sobriety, I'm able to see it for what it was. That even then, at 21 years old, I wasn't drinking for the sake of drinking. It wasn't ever about drink. It was about oblivion. No moderation, no hesitation, just a race to fill every void and gap in my body with as much ethanol as I possibly could, as quickly as I could, every time I had a drink. And that was it. When I got back to the UK, that's when I should have stopped drinking. all the warning signs and the alcoholic behaviors and the addictive personality, they were all present right there in those 6 months at 21 years old. Everything that would later happen to me was represented in prototype form in that 6-month period at 21 years old. And if I had been clever, there was time to stop it then. Before I got sober, I used to look back on that period, that kind of working holiday, with nothing but joy. I remembered it as a very happy time. It was slightly before cameras on phones, so there's very little record of it. But now, in sobriety, with a better understanding of my own personality and my own alcoholism, I can see that period for what it was. I can see it as a real manifestation of alcoholism, as it would present in my later life too. And I wish I had seen it then and stopped it then. But we make excuses, don't we? And we justify and we rationalize instead of understanding that there's a problem here and addressing it when I was young enough that it wouldn't have repeatedly ruined my life, which it eventually did. I just said about it that I was young. That's what young people do. I needed to get it out of my system. And that's how I justified it. The problem is that when you're an alcoholic of my type, you don't get alcohol out of your system. You have to accept that alcoholism is the system. So what about you? Can you remember an experience from your younger years that, looking back, should have made you stop drinking then, but you didn't? And is there something that, with all the knowledge that you have now in recovery or in sobriety, is there something that makes you wish you could go back to that young you in one particular moment and smack the bottle out of their hand? What is that moment for you? Leave it in the comments. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you like. I'm not your dad. Check out the links in the description if you want some of the nice sobery things that I have for you. And as always, good luck out there.